and we will start right now. I'm a professor of history at George Mason University, and I have the honor of being the director of this project. You're all, I would like to tell you welcome, and thanks for coming to George Mason University campus for this unique but very exciting event. Before we have our plenary sessions, I would like to start the session with introductory remarks by different sponsors and intellectual leaders of this project. In many ways, we have been talking about Muslims and Muslim societies in media beyond our imaginations. I think when I started my graduate school 20 years ago, we would have something about the Muslims on international leaves, but it now turns out that even about domestic news, we talk about Muslims and Muslim societies. And in these days, the voices and opinions of humanities scholars and historians are highly overshadowed. This project started with that realization that the scholars should have something to say about these events. And it started with the encouragement of the National Endowment for Humanities and their staff and their director is here. And their slogan, which I love, it says, democracies need wisdom. And it seems their idea is that we need the wisdom of humanities scholars intervening in the public debates on Muslims and Muslim societies. I do have the privilege of writing down what I need to say about this topic, and it's in your folder, so I'm not going to repeat those. I have some sort of long introductory remarks, but instead I would like to give the floor to various sponsors of this project, and we will start with our own Provost Peter Stearns, who is a distinguished war historian. Then I will give the floor to the president of Virginia Foundation for Humanities, our partner. And you should know that National Endowment for Humanities have branches in every state, and I encourage all of my colleagues to cooperate with them because we always know the federal headquarters, but every state has its own humanities foundation, and it was a great pleasure to work with them in this project. And then we will finally have Jim Leach, Chairman Jim Leach of the National Endowment for Humanities. Before I give the floor to them one-to-one, I would like to thank all the organizers, especially Virginia Foundation for Humanities, and the very talented staff of our center. There are 4 or 5 of them over there in the chair and in the back. And if you want to have any project, please think again as a scholar. Unless you have your staff ready, do not start this. It takes a lot of time. You need at least 4 very good staff members to initiate such a project, and I'm very happy that we have them so we could do it. So I would like to give the floor to Peter Stearns.
Thank you. My main task this morning is, I hope, obvious. On behalf of George Mason University, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this conference, particularly those of you who come from international locations, but to all of you. We're very pleased that you could join us, and frankly, we're quite excited about the potential for these days of discussion. I also can't refrain from adding, as a world historian, that I find the subject matter of this conference particularly timely, and frankly, although I can't stay for all of the sessions, look forward to learning from the results. It's been obvious for a couple of decades now that even those of us who thought we had thoroughly retrained ourselves in world history have been getting major aspects of the half century after 1300, the 5 centuries after 13 or 1400, have been getting these centuries wrong. Wrong in terms of oversimple interpretations, wrong in terms, in some cases, of actual factual inaccuracy. As many of you know, the principal thrust of revisions to our dominant impressions of the world in these centuries has come from work on East Asia. And with particular focus on recalibrating our understanding of economic relationships during this period. The opportunity to take a look at similar topics from the standpoint of the great Islamic empires is overdue. And again, from a world history standpoint, I look forward to learning from the results, not only about economic relationships, but cultural and political relationships, as you will be discussing over the next several days. And I think we owe it not only to ourselves, but to our various audiences of students and general public to take from this not only a sense of scholarly recalibration, but also a commitment to figure out how we can best convey this revision of our approach to world history and the role of global Islam in world history, how we can best convey this to our various audiences. So I take more than usual pleasure in welcoming a conference to George Mason, and frankly have the selfish hope that I will emerge from your work better informed. Thank you again for joining us.
I'm Rob Vaughan, and in spite of where we are, I'm here to welcome you to Charlottesville, Virginia, and the University of Virginia, where you'll be arriving on Wednesday. I'm the president of the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, and we've been delighted to be partnering with George Mason University in this endeavor. The foundation, as Cemil mentioned, is a state program. We receive 21% of our funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we hope that it survives this year under the current political pressures. We are a program center, a research center, and an educational center. And our directions in the last 24 months or so, and really for the entire life of the organization, which is also affiliated with the University of Virginia, has focused on cultures, diverse cultures and diverse communities. And in the last 24 months or so, that has broadened to include greater emphasis on the Muslim world, Middle Eastern studies, largely through our fellowship program, which brings in people from all over the world for a residential period, summer or a semester or a year at the foundation. So we were looking forward very much to this. Personally, I've published in religious freedom issues and have taught a course on religious freedom around the world, actually, and while going around the world, in fact. So this one has a special interest for me, and I know that I'm going to enjoy meeting all of you and welcoming you to Charlottesville. We begin there on Wednesday morning with a program at 9 a.m. that I hope all of you will attend, including some scholars from Virginia for the most part. And later that evening at 6:45, a reception in the rotunda of the University of Virginia, and then followed by a talk by Chairman Jim Leach, who's sitting here next to me and who's next up. So thank you, Cemil, and thank you, Peter, for involving the Virginia Foundation. We're delighted. We look forward to a lot more programming, a lot more research, a lot more fellows in our own program to come in and work with us and with each other on a better understanding of this community and the history of the Muslim world. Mr. Leach?
Well, thank you, Rob. And let me just say, coming as a little bit of an outsider here, that I think it couldn't be more appropriate to be at a university named George Mason University, because we Americans probably underestimate George Mason, if we're not Virginians, that is.
No, of course not.
More than any of the other revolutionary leaders. But basically, his words rivaled those of Thomas Jefferson at a particular moment in time, and that's quite a rivalry to have. And we're obviously in revolutionary times today, and the uplift of the logic of George Mason and Jefferson, I think, are relevant. We're also in a splintered world in so many ways, which all of you understand well, and we're a little bit surprised this last week to find the world splintering geologically as well as on sociological and political and religious grounds with the earthquake and tsunami off Japan. But the National Endowment for the Humanities has taken on what we call a Bridging Cultures initiative over the last year. And it's designed to do a number of things, but basically we're emphasizing two subjects. One, a broad philosophical subject of civility, and then secondly, a focus on Muslim studies and Muslim issues. I might just say on the civility front, because a lot of this is tied together. I mean, issues of the Muslim world today are civility issues vis-a-vis our society, and great questions of which side is being more uncivil. But if you think about internal American politics, we are breaking down in ways that we haven't so much in modern times, but have a lot of historical precedent for. But the words of America are not as thoughtful as they might be, but they carry a lot of emotive weight to them. We have public officials called communists and fascists, and in fact, I sometimes describe the great difference between George W. Bush and Barack Obama being that Bush was called a fascist, and Obama was being called a fascist and a communist, sometimes at the same time by the same people. But what one might wonder what's wrong with hyperbole, and frankly, the logic is the message. If you take these words, if America sacrificed 400,000 soldiers to defeat fascism, that is a word that therefore has warring implications. Likewise, words can uplift, and coming back to Mason and Jefferson, there are some really uplifting words that can bring people together and that have universal meaning. We have the great conceptualization not far from here where Abraham Lincoln in his second inaugural talked about changing policy with malice towards none and with charity for all. And those are the kinds of concepts that can bring people, I think, forward. We have Barack Obama in Cairo talking about the need to narrow the divisions between the great religions of the world and to communicate between youth in Kansas and Egypt in a very symbolic way. And these are the kinds of things that we can emphasize, or we can emphasize great divisions. I might just stress that in the background of all of the very narrow outlooks of some people, whether it be concerns about placement of mosques, whether it be this extraordinary episode where one American citizen held the highest leaders of American public life at bay, threatening a Quran burning, that in a society that's huge, you do have lots and lots of different points of view. But in the background also of all these great divisions that exist historically and all the great commonalities that also exist historically, and one could choose one or the other to emphasize, we have these scientific breakthroughs, and it's my personal view that the greatest political science observation of the last century comes from Einstein when he said that splitting the atom had changed everything except our way of thinking. And the implications of that are very large, one of which is that we're the first generation that leaders of the world have options to destroy virtually everything, not just win or wage war, but also that human nature is somewhat of a constant. Now, historians and psychologists like to say that there is a nurture as well as nature element of human nature, but one of the great questions is, are we going to grow? And if we're going to grow, what are the things we have to learn the most? And it's hard not to put tolerance up there at a pretty high level. Well, I'm just going to end with the concept of Lincoln, though. I mean, he, before the Civil War, and as it was breaking out, borrowed from Scripture the notion that a house divided cannot stand. And if we think of a home and a community, if we think of a community in a country, if we think of a country in a world, it's pretty self-evident that this house divided analogy is for real. And one of the graver things when you tie all of this to Einstein's words is whether a global community can stand in and of itself. And right now, look to America. A few decades back, that the great challenge was communism, decades before that, fascism, and now the great traumas seem to be of a religious nature relating to countries which carry different religious values. On the other hand, there isn't anyone that doesn't recognize the need to realize how similar these religions are. And so I think our challenge is to advance respect, and the only way that I know to advance respect is to advance understanding. And so that is why we are advancing programs of this nature. And we're honored to be here with some of the finest scholars in the country on this particular subject. And we're also proud that George Mason is leading it. And I think it's impressive that it's the state of Virginia, which helped lead one kind of revolution of thought, and hopefully can help lead in another. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.